Welcome to HFY Hero Fi, where the ordinary become extraordinary. Here we celebrate the fearless, the champions who rise against impossible odds. From tales of distant galaxies to the darkest corners of the supernatural, HFY Hero Fi brings you the ultimate stories of heroism. If you believe you've been chosen, heed the call and subscribe now. Let us Hero Fi you and come with us on our next adventure. Veradin was carved and terraced into the cliffs above a hard blue bay, its walls stepping upward in elegant tiers like a stairway to heaven. Sea winds roamed its streets freely, tugging at banners stitched with silver thread, carrying the sharp scent of salt and kelp and tar from the shipyards below. Great arched galleries opened toward the water, and from them the elves watched the horizon. Even the marble seemed touched by the ocean's life, smooth as shell, bright as bone, veined faintly like waves frozen mid-curl. Wolfrid strode at the front, broad-shouldered and red-haired, his presence like a steadfast oak in winter. At his side walked Elias, dark-haired and keen-eyed, the faint scent of storm always clinging to him. Alba followed, white hair catching the light like spun silver, her blue eyes sharp as frost beneath the green hood of her cloak. "It is nice to smell the sea air and not be about to drown in its waves," Alba said. "Let's not dredge up bad memories. I'm angry my armor and shield are still at the bottom of the sea," Wolfrid replied with a frown. Elias shook his head and laughed. They had been through so much since they had left the capital of Leongarde. The shipwreck was the first of many unfortunate events they had endured. "We have reached Veradin at last. That is what matters." Alba, Wolfrid, and Elias continued to walk across the stone walkways, taking in the sights of the massive city of Veradin. Below them in the bay, masts bristled in the harbor like a forest of spears. Dock bells chimed. The harbor bustled as its workers moved in a well-practiced rhythm. The Veradin fleet rested in the harbor, quiet but poised to sail at a moment's command. They were brought before the elven king of Veradin, Lord Valador Thalion IV, seated upon a throne carved from living wood. His silver circlet gleamed, and his gaze was calm yet shadowed with foreknowledge. Wolfrid stepped forward and presented the seal of King Leongarde of Leonis. He told Lord Valador of the Dark Lord's siege against Leongarde. King Valador listened in silence. Then he spoke, his voice like wind through ancient leaves. "I had hoped my reign would be a reign of peace, but alas, it cannot be. The Dark Lords have ascended and threatened my King Leongarde and our kingdom. This cannot be allowed to stand. The Dark Lords must be vanquished." He rose and led them through hidden corridors toward the secret chamber of the Sword of Sacred Flame. "Why is this sword all the way here in Veradin and not in Leongarde?" Wolfrid asked Elias. Elias shook his head. "You must have fallen asleep in Master Riddick's history lessons, I see. King Valador I during the First Great War bent the knee to King Leonis, as long as he and his people would remain the guardians of the sword. To avoid tyranny, the sword cannot be in the hands of the High King." Alba nodded. "Wielders of the Sword of Sacred Flame must go on a quest, a trial of faith and flame in order to wield it." She walked closely behind Elias, who followed King Valador. "Though I've read the ancient texts, I fear what lies ahead." King Valador pressed his fist into a hole in a large stone door. They heard an ancient mechanism unlock inside the door, and then the massive door slid open. "Enter with me, Guardians." There, suspended in a column of divine fire, hung a blade radiant beyond mortal forging. The flames did not consume it, but extended from it in all directions. Alba gasped. "It is as the ancient texts describe. Though my love is the winter snow, there is a beauty in these flames I cannot explain." Wolfrid admired the flames as they danced in front of them. "What must we do?" Valador turned to them. "It is said that this blade was forged by God. Each of you is a strong warrior. As the last of the guardians of the realm, the responsibility falls to you. I have heard of your deeds from my soldiers. Each of you must walk through the fire. If you pass through, then you may wield the Sword of Sacred Flame. Walk by faith, Guardians." The fire roared softly in front of them, but they felt no menace in its movement. Elias stepped first. Heat licked at his skin as he walked forward, his eyes fixed on the sword. Whisperings of his missteps began to plague his mind, distracting him from the sword. Doubt bubbled up inside his heart. He faltered and had to turn back, for the heat of the flames was beginning to become unbearable. When he returned, Alba stepped forward. She pressed farther, teeth clenched, frost crackling instinctively along her skin. But fear pierced her heart and made her waver. Her frost could not protect her as the flames licked against her skin, and she too stepped back. She hung her head as she took her place next to Elias and King Valador. Tears pressed at the edge of her eyes. "Did he speak to you, Elias?" "The Lord said I must rely more on him. That my faith is weak because I rely on myself." Wolfrid clasped her shoulder. "There is room for growth in all of us." Then Wolfrid entered. He did not hesitate before the flames as they licked at his legs and arms. He walked as though walking into morning light. The flames parted around him. When his hand wrapped around the golden hilt, the fire collapsed inward and vanished. A vast and unseen voice filled the chamber. "Elias and Alba, do not be disheartened, my children. You are worthy warriors, but Wolfrid was meant to wield the sword." Elias and Alba flanked Wolfrid as he held the sword of sacred flame. Its blade was flawless despite centuries of legend, its metal brighter than newly forged steel. Ancient runes burned faintly along its length, and the pommel held a sun-shaped gem that flickered like a captive flame. Those who looked upon it felt the strange certainty that this sword had been forged as a beacon against the darkness of the world. Valador bowed his head. "This is a sacred weapon that can absorb magic and is twice effective on the undead. It is the only weapon that can conquer the Dark Lords." Wolfrid lifted the blade. It glowed like dawn breaking over a battlefield. 14 days passed like a drawn breath held too long. Veradin prepared with precision. From the terraced heights of white marble, the sound of hammer on metal rang down toward the harbor in a constant flow. Shipwrights reinforced hulls with fresh iron bands. Sailmakers stitched through the night beneath lantern light, pale canvas billowing like ghosts in the sea wind. In the mountain forges, sparks leapt and died like fallen stars as armor was reforged and blades sharpened to a keen edge. Below the palace galleries, the fleet of 70 ships swayed in the tide in disciplined silence. Their silent sway was comforting, though a bit eerie as the sun descended beyond the horizon. Preparations for war had to be swift. According to communications from King Leongarde to King Valador, the Dark Lords Sorn and Gorgath had laid siege to Leongarde, but the army of Leonis was holding its own against the Dark Army. They would hold until reinforcements from Veradin arrived. Within the training courts carved into the mountain's upper tiers, the Guardians worked among Veradin's finest soldiers. Wolfrid rose before dawn each morning and descended into the inner practice chamber, where the sword of sacred flame rested upon a marble stand. When he lifted it, the blade glowed steadily like the subtle light of the rising sun. He practiced with reverence, learning the balance, the timing, the quiet hum that vibrated up through the hilt into his bones. At times, it flared brighter when he struck with conviction, as though the blade itself approved his faith. Elias trained where sea winds crashed hardest against the mountain. On the high parapets overlooking the bay, he stood through gathering storms, dark hair whipped by salt wind. When thunder rolled across the horizon, he raised his hands and drew lightning down in branching veins of white-blue light. At first, the power bucked and snapped wildly, but day by day his control tightened. Soon, lightning no longer raged, but answered his call like a disciplined hound returning to its master. Alba sought colder places within the mountain. In shaded courtyards where seawater mist drifted in thin veils, she spun her quarterstaff through arcs of controlled fury. Frost burst from her strikes in crystalline blooms that spread across marble tiles before shattering into glittering shards. Soldiers watched from a distance, whispering as ice crawled across stone and then vanished at her command. They sparred with Veradin's veterans, who were lean warriors accustomed to deck battles and boarding strikes. The Guardians adapted quickly. Alba learned to fight with narrow footing as though upon a ship's deck. Elias practiced calling lightning through his staff, blue arcs crackling along the wood as he kept his footing on the brine-slick stones. Wolfrid drilled shield formations with elven captains who moved like flowing water. But at night, when the harbor lanterns flickered like fallen constellations upon the dark sea, the three knelt together in the palace chapel carved deep into the mountain's heart. They prayed that King Leongarde still held the walls of Leongarde. They prayed the siege had not tightened beyond hope. They prayed the 14 days of preparation would not be too many. "We must have faith that we will arrive on time," Wolfrid said. On the 13th afternoon, as weapons rang and boots thundered across the training court, a sound cut through it all. It was a deep and familiar laughter. Elias froze mid-strike. Across the courtyard, a tall figure approached. He was scarred but very much alive. "Dragar," Elias yelled as he and the Guardians ran up to him. Sunlight caught the old scar across his cheek as he grinned. "You look surprised, children. Did I not tell you it would take more than a skeleton to get rid of me?" For a heartbeat, none of them moved. Elias embraced Dragar, nearly knocking him backward. "It is so good to see you, friend. I have been racked with guilt for leaving you behind. "We all have," he said, motioning to Alba and Wolfrid. "We should have come together to Veradin." Dragar's expression softened. He placed a firm hand on Elias's shoulder. "Do not worry your heart, friend. The mission was more important. Veradin will soon be ready because you pressed on." Alba stepped forward next, eyes bright though she said nothing. Wolfrid clasped Dragar's forearm in a silent warrior greeting, his grip firm, his relief unspoken but visible. Hope, like the tide, had come back in, and so they were four once more. When the 14th day had finally arrived, the Guardians could let out a breath. At dawn, the harbor of Veradin thundered with motion. 70 ships slipped from their moorings in disciplined succession, white sails unfurling to catch the sea wind. The marble terraces of the mountain city gleamed behind them like a watchful crown, growing smaller as the fleet pressed outward into open sea. King Valador stood upon the flagship's elevated stern deck, silver armor catching the morning light, so that he seemed clothed in light. His navy blue cloak snapped sharply in the wind. Below him, Admiral Colin Ironclad moved with the certainty of a man born to command water and war alike. His voice carried cleanly across the decks, cutting through seagull cries and the groan of timber. "It will take 3 days to get to Leongarde," the Admiral said. "Be ready. This voyage will not be an easy one, for the Dark Lords do not want us to reach our king." The words hung heavy, a sharp contrast to the calmness of their first day at sea. The fleet moved like a migrating host of swans, orderly and magnificent. The Guardians stood near the starboard rail of their assigned warship. Wolfrid rested a hand upon the hilt of the sword of sacred flame. "The sea wind flows in our favor. There is hope we will reach Leongarde in time." Elias watched the horizon with quiet eyes. "Yes, our faith must be strong if we are to triumph against the darkness." Alba hugged her cloak closer. "I would be lying if I said I was not afraid, but our Lord has never abandoned us." The first night passed without incident. The second night did not. It began with stillness. The wind died without warning. Sails sagged. The sea flattened into a sheet of black glass. Orders were shouted across the deck, but then the fog came, swallowing up their words. It did not roll in like natural fog. It descended, thick, smothering, heavy with the scent of rot and cold iron. Within moments, the fleet's outer ships vanished from sight. Bells rang from somewhere unseen. Whispers spread among the ranks. "I heard what you said," a human soldier grumbled, gripping the hilt of his sword. "This is why you can't trust an elf." "I said nothing," the elf replied sharply. "Watch your foul tongue." More accusations followed. A soldier shoved another. "You mock us," another human snapped. "I heard you." Steel flashed. Voices rose in fury over imagined insults and slights. "I will not be insulted by a dusty human," the elf spat, drawing his blade from its ornate scabbard. Through the fog came a faint voice, thin and venomous, slipping between the Veradin soldiers like a serpent. Their discipline fractured. Blades clashed where none should have. Through the choking gray, the crack of splintering would sounded, once and then again. A scream, then another. 2 ships drifted out of formation and disappeared entirely, swallowed whole by the fog and confusion. On the Guardian's deck, tension thickened like a storm air before lightning. Alba narrowed her eyes, peering through the haze. There, far off, a yellow light. It's growing and getting closer to us. It pulsed faintly at first, then brighter, like a malignant star rising beneath the water. Before she could continue, Admiral Ironclad's voice tore across the deck. "Deathbringers," the Admiral yelled. "Prepare for battle." The fog parted in jagged seams. Black ships emerged. Their hulls were scarred and warped, sails shredded yet somehow full. Lanterns of sickly yellow burned along their rails. Upon their decks stood sailors. Hollow-eyed corpses gripped ropes and blades with jerking precision, their movements unnatural, as if pulled by invisible strings. "They're undead," Wolfrid yelled as the ships came closer. An unseen necromancer guided them. The largest of the black vessels surged forward, its iron ram gleaming at its prow. "Brace!" the Admiral shouted. The impact came like a hammer from the deep. Wood splintered. Soldiers staggered. The enemy flagship smashed into the Guardian's vessel with bone-rattling force, locking them together in a violent embrace. Wolfrid planted his feet as the deck lurched. Elias grabbed a rigging line to steady himself. Alba's boots slid, but then held. There was no hesitation. They leapt. Boots struck the enemy deck in unison. The stench of decay assaulted them immediately, making their eyes water. Skeletal sailors turned as one, jaws hanging slack, rusted cutlasses raised. Alba slammed her quarterstaff against the planks, shooting frost outward in jagged veins. Ice-encased rib cages and limbs, locking undead forms in brittle prisons before shattering them apart. Die skeletons. Again, can these things even die? They're already dead, Wolfrid said as he advanced. His power flowed through the sword of sacred flame. It ignited with pure radiance. These are mere puppets. Watch. When his sword struck bone, there was no spray of fragments. The skeletons burst into ash, collapsing into neat gray piles that scattered across the warped boards. Elias thrust his spearhand forward. Lightning tore from his spear in branching fury, illuminating the fog in blinding blue flashes. Two undead sailors convulsed and toppled backward into the sea, sinking without struggle. There are so many. The undead pressed forward in relentless waves. God will give us victory, Wolfrid yelled. Do not be afraid. His voice cut through their fear like a beacon in the night. Behind them, Veradin soldiers rallied. Courage spread outward from the three Guardians like ripples. Despite the relentless attacks from the Guardians, the undead pressed forward. The fog had not come alone. Somewhere within it, something far greater watched. The deck of the black ship was slick with brine and ash. Undead sailors collapsed in smoldering heaps wherever the sacred flame had passed. Frost crawled along broken planks like pale veins. Lightning still flickered faintly in the air, the scent mixing with rot and salt. Around them, the battle raged in fractured pockets. Veradin soldiers locked blades with skeletal sailors while fog fought to swallow the horizon in every direction. Then, the fighting near the Guardians thinned. Not because the enemy retreated, but because something else was coming. The air grew heavy and oppressive. The remaining skeletons parted unnaturally, stepping aside in stiff obedience. Even the sea seemed to hush, its rhythm stilled beneath the weight of an unseen will. A figure stepped forward from the swirling gray. A Helgrim, but not like the others they had fought in the past. This one wore robes of deep crimson that moved as though stirred by wind no one else could feel. Its frame was tall and gaunt, its flesh stretched thin over bone, its eyes burning not with hollow vacancy, but with knowing intelligence. Dark rune-like symbols pulsed faintly along its sleeves, the symbols glowing like embers buried in ash. It raised one clawed hand slightly, and the remaining undead froze mid-motion. Its voice, when it spoke, was clear and direct. You three have been a thorn in my master's side. I will annihilate all of you for his sake. Elias blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by the sound of language coming from something that should not possess it. You can speak? The Helgrim's lips peeled back in something resembling amusement. Obviously, humans really are more stupid than they look. Alba shifted her grip on her quarterstaff, boots sliding into a braced stance. What do I care if it can speak? It isn't the first Helgrim, nor will it be the last that falls at our feet. Less talk and more fighting. Her staff swept low, frost bursting outward in a crescent arc aimed at the creature's legs. The Helgrim leapt backward with unnatural agility, robes snapping like torn banners. It retaliated with a blast of blackened energy that scorched the deck where Alba had stood an instant before. Elias answered with lightning. Bolts forked across the fog, illuminating the red-robed figure in stark flashes. The Helgrim raised a hand, deflecting part of the blast, but not all of it. The air crackled violently as electricity tore into its side. Wolfrid advanced through the chaos, sacred flame blazing brighter in response to the creature's corruption. The sword hummed a resonant note that seemed almost eager. The Helgrim lunged, claws outstretched. Wolfrid met it head-on. Sword met corrupted flesh. Light met shadow. When the sacred flame struck true, there was no explosion of bone. There was only a burst of radiant fire that consumed the creature from within. The red robes ignited, collapsing inward as the Helgrim shrieked an echoing, hollow sound that dissolved into smoke. The body fell to ash. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the sky split. A searing lance of black flame streaked through the fog and struck the Veradin flagship in the distance. The impact exploded across its deck, scattering sailors and splintering railings. Wolfrid's head snapped toward the blaze, instincts sharpening. This isn't the main ship. It was a trick. I sense a dark power coming from that other ship. The necromancer must be there. Through the thinning fog, another silhouette loomed farther out. It was larger and darker. Its sails were nearly indistinguishable from the fog itself. From its deck pulsed a rhythm of malignant energy, like a second heartbeat beneath the sea's surface. Elias' jaw tightened. Memory struck him like lightning. Brandon wore that same traitorous red robe. He spoke of a master. Perhaps this is he. The pieces fell into place. The fog, the madness among the soldiers, the intelligent Helgrim sent to delay them, the flaming strike against Valador's ship. This battle had never been about the skeleton crew. It had been bait. Somewhere within that greater shadow waited the mind directing it all. A necromancer was here. The true black flagship loomed through the thinning fog like a wound in the sea. Its hull was taller than the others, darker, carved with jagged sigils that seemed to writhe when lightning flashed. The water around it churned unnaturally, as though something beneath the surface answered its presence. Elias felt the pull in his chest before he spoke. That one. Without hesitation, the Guardians seized control of the captured enemy vessel. Wolfrid took the helm, while Veradin soldiers cut loose tangled lines. The ship groaned as he forced it into a hard turn. "Hold fast!" Elias shouted. The prow slammed into the true black flagship with a splintering crash. It screamed, iron bit deep. The vessels locked together. The Guardians leapt across. The deck they landed upon felt wrong. It was unnaturally cold despite the heat of battle, as though warmth refused to linger there. At its center stood a tall, pale man in dark robes trimmed with crimson. His hair hung long and black against his shoulders, and his eyes burned with quiet hatred. Drakmar, the traitor of whom Brandon spoke, regarded them without fear. "Your quest ends here. You have failed." He extended his hand. Black flames roared toward them in a sweeping arc, not the orange of hearthfire but a twisting, corrupted blaze. The heat struck, missing the Guardians as they sidestepped and tore into the wooden deck instead. Wolfrid stepped forward, wielding the sacred flame, which burned brilliantly amidst the fog. Drakmar's black fire met the sacred sword, but no harm came to Wolfrid. Instead, the black flames bent inward, drawn into the sword as though swallowed by a radiant abyss. The steel glowed brighter, the unholy energy absorbed completely. Drakmar's expression tightened. He spread his arms wide. A thick cloud of poisonous gas erupted across the deck, rolling low and fast. The air burned in their lungs. Visibility vanished in seconds. "Your little sword will not be enough to vanquish me." Alba unleashed a burst of frost that slowed the creeping vapor. Elias summoned wind and crackling light, carving open a narrow path through the choking, poison cloud. But Drakmar had already retreated to the rail. A deafening shriek split the fog. A wyvern burst upward from the fog, wings beating in violent rhythm. Its talons hooked the edge of the deck as Drakmar leapt onto its back in one fluid motion. The creature wheeled sharply and disappeared into the clouds before the Guardians could strike. They did not pursue. They could not. The sea erupted around them. "Now what?" Alba said, letting out an annoyed breath. Drakirim, dragon-shaped beasts crowned with jagged bone ridges, burst from the fog. One seized the railing of a nearby Veradin ship with hooked claws and vaulted onto the deck. Another lashed out at sailors scrambling for cover. On a different ship, another wrapped its scaled arms around the mast, attempting to bring it down upon the Veradin warriors. "Back to the flagship," Elias shouted. "We must get back to King Valador and the Admiral." Wolfrid cut down the nearest beast, the sacred flame cleaving scale and bone in a burst of radiant light. Alba's frost locked another creature's jaws long enough for Veradin warriors to drive spears deep into its body. Lightning split the sky as Elias electrified the dark water, stunning a rising creature before it could climb on board the ship. One by one, the Drakirim fell, and as suddenly as it had begun, the unnatural resistance faltered. Without Drakmars guiding them, the remaining undead sailors collapsed where they stood. The black ships burned along their rails, flames climbing warped masts, before the vessels drifted apart and began to sink. Smoke thinned. The fog withdrew. When the Guardians returned to the Veradin flagship, they found King Valador standing amid wounded soldiers, his silver armor scorched and streaked with blood. Yet he stood upright, voice steady as he directed the reorganization of the battered fleet. 70 ships had sailed. 50 remained. Valador raised his blade so all could see. "Do not be discouraged. We have defeated this enemy, and we will defeat the rest. Onward!" The word carried across broken decks and salt-stung faces, and a cheer arose among the surviving warriors. The sea calmed, but far above, beyond the lifting fog, the sky remained dark where Drakmar had fled. The fleet arrived at dawn beneath a sky stained with smoke. Leongarde did not greet them with banners or shouts of joy. Instead, the city groaned under the pressure of war. Black siege towers loomed against its outer walls. Flames licked at shattered battlements. The once golden banners of Leonis hung torn and soot-streaked, snapping weakly in the wind. The plains before the city churned with movement, an ocean of armored bodies pressing against stone. "The city still stands," Elias breathed. Wolfrid clasped his shoulder. "Praise God that it does. The hour has come. Look to the beach. The army of the Dark Lords awaits us." The beach below Leongarde had become a battlefield of smoke and broken bodies. Goblins shrieked and skittered across the sand while trolls lumbered among them, hurling stones and swinging crude iron clubs at the Leongarde defenders struggling to hold the shoreline. Then horns sounded from the sea. Alba twirled her quarterstaff in her hand and laughed. "Good. After we're done here, the Dark Lords will never return here. Let's make them remember the courage of Leonis." Horns sounded from the Veradin ships as anchors dropped. Gangplanks slammed onto the land. Soldiers poured onto the piers in disciplined ranks like a tsunami consuming all in their wake. The crash of swords and the thunder of war reverberated on the beach. Wolfrid leapt into the surf first, the sword of sacred flame blazing bright as it cleaved through goblin flesh and bone. Elias followed, lightning snapping from his staff into a troll. Alba vaulted onto the sand beside him. Her staff spun, unleashing bolts of frost that sent doom wolves and goblins alike crashing onto sand and rock. The Dark Lord's forces broke quickly under the sudden fury. They were trampled under the relentless Veradin advance, with King Valador at its head. From the ships, Admiral Ironclad had his soldiers shoot ballistas to annihilate the giants and trolls. "This is too easy," Alba laughed. Dragar sliced off the head of a scurrying goblin with his sword, and then whirled around to stab another goblin with his spear. He yanked the spear out of the goblin, and it collapsed to the ground. He turned to Wolfrid with a grim expression. "She's right. This is too easy. Something's wrong." King Valador rode up to them. King Leongarde had sent us word that the Dark Lord's forces are malnourished and exhausted from the weeks of the siege. That does not mean we should be overconfident. Do not forget they outnumber our forces. Forward! The Guardians and Dragar moved swiftly through the chaos behind King Valador. The thin ranks of the Dark Lord's forces began to crumble. Enemy corpses decorated the beach like driftwood, and the few that survived fled. Through the smoke and drifting ash, a group of armored riders emerged from the city gate and galloped toward them. At their head rode the captain of the guard, his armor bloody from battle. He reined in before the Guardians and King Valador breathing hard. "King Leongarde has been waiting for you," he said urgently. "He sends you greetings and bids you welcome. We are glad you're back. The Dark Lord Gorgath is stationed to the north of the city. He rides upon a frost dragon and wields a mighty axe. The Dark Lord Sorn is stationed to the south. Be wary of his shadow attack. They're maneuvering toward you. This battle is far from over." Wolfrid gripped the hilt of his sword. "Good. That's why we're here." Just then, the enemy poured in from both sides like a dark tide. The enemy climbed over the heaps of corpses without a care as they continued to surge forward. The momentum they had gained against the enemy slowed to a crawl. Doom wolves prowled, their eyes burning with feral malice as they tore into fallen soldiers' friends and foe alike. Giants and trolls in heavy armor pushed siege rams toward the inner gate. The battlefield swallowed the Guardians whole. Alba spun her quarterstaff in tight arcs, frost exploding outward with each strike. Goblins froze mid-lunge, shattering under the boots of advancing Leonis soldiers. A doom wolf leapt toward her throat. She pivoted, driving her staff into its ribs as ice sealed its jaws shut. Elias moved like a storm unleashed. Lightning split downward from his hands, tearing through clusters of orcs and scattering them in smoking ruin. Wolfrid and Dragar carved a steady path through the goblins, shield bashing and spear thrusting with relentless rhythm. But the tide did not turn. There were too many. A roar rose above the chaos. A towering figure emerged from the enemy ranks, mounted upon a frost dragon. The Dark Lord Gorgath had entered the field of battle as if he were a walking statue of ice and snow. His presence rippled through the enemy lines like a malevolent chill. Goblins rallied. Orcs howled. Trolls pressed harder. A group of Veradin soldiers rushed to intercept them, led by Dragar. Gorgath answered with a single swing of his massive war axe. The blow crashed through shield and armor alike, hurling warriors aside like broken dolls. Alba's eyes widened as she took in Gorgatha's massive size. He truly is a monster. What do we do? Wolfrid turned to Elias and Alba. "I don't know about you," Wolfrid said with a smile, "but I'm hungry. I want to wish you and Alba a long, happy life. Live for me." And with that he ran toward Gorgath. As he neared, the sword seemed to grow in strength, easily cutting through goblins and trolls alike. Gorgath surged forward on his beastly mount. He swung a massive war axe and easily cleaved a soldier down the middle of his head, nearly cutting him in two. Gorgatha's eyes landed on Wolfrid. "Face me if you want to die." "Funny. That's my line." Wolfrid lunged forward with his shield and deflected Gorgatha's second blow. The impact thundered through his arm and drove him half a step back as sparks burst from the collision. "You're still alive after that blow," Gorgath said with a fanged smile. "It has been some time since I've met a worthy warrior." His eyes landed on Wolfrid's green cloak. "You are one of the guardians of the realm. I see my subordinates did not eradicate you all as I had commanded. There were to be no survivors from our attack on the monastery. No matter. I will finish the job." Before Gorgath could land another blow on Wolfrid, Elias launched a bolt of electricity from his spear. "What are you doing here?" Wolfrid asked as he noticed Alba and Elias next to him. "I told you to live a long and happy life. You're not the only one who's hungry," Elias said with his hand gripped firmly around his spear. "We live or die together. How dare you try to abandon us?" Alba added, smacking a goblin across the head with her staff. "I'll get you for that later." With a snarl, Gorgath surged forward again, his axe sweeping in a brutal arc meant to split Wolfrid from shoulder to hip. Lightning cracked from Elias' spear. The bolt slammed into Gorgatha's shoulder, staggering the Dark Lord just enough to give Wolfrid time to roll out of the way. Alba followed his attack with all the frost bolts she could muster. Gorgath laughed at her. "Is that all you can muster, daughter of the snow? You should be on my side. I can make you strong." Alba sneered. "You claim to be the Lord of Frost. You are false. I would never follow you. I only follow the one true God." "This is why your people were so easily conquered," Gorgath growled. "You are weak." The frost dragon reared back, its vast chest swelling as a deep, grinding rumble rolled from its throat. Then the beast exhaled. A torrent of frozen wind erupted from its jaws, a roaring blast of razor-sharp ice and killing cold. The soldiers that couldn't get out of the way were frozen under the intensity of the blast. Alba barely had time to raise her staff before the blast struck her. The frozen gale swallowed her whole, and her figure vanished beneath a sudden shell of white ice. For a moment, the mound of ice stood silent, glittering in the pale light. Wolfrid's heart felt as though it would explode in his chest as he yelled Alba's name. A righteous wrath unlike any he had ever felt surged through his body, illuminating the sword of sacred flame like a firestorm. "Die, you monster!" Elias unleashed a storm of electricity upon Gorgath before the frost dragon could attack once more. "Now, Wolfrid!" Wolfrid surged through the opening, the sword of sacred flame shining like a beacon on the field. "That blade!" Gorgath gasped. It was said it no longer existed. Wolfrid smiled as he thrust it forward. Light exploded outward like a sunrise bursting from the horizon. The blade pierced through armor, bone, and flesh, its radiance burning away corruption. In one slash, Wolfrid sliced through Gorgath and his frost dragon. The beast screeched as it, and its master collapsed into the sand. Wolfrid and Elias turned toward the dome of ice, tears running down their faces. Just then, the dome of ice began to melt and Alba emerged from it. "Are those tears for me? Did you really think that little blast would be enough to get rid of me? Come now." They ran to her and embraced her. "I thought you were dead," Wolfrid said, holding back a sob. "My annoying little sister." Elias ruffled Alba's hair. "Don't you ever scare us like that again." Around the Guardians, the soldiers of Veradin continued the fight. Dragar was nowhere to be found, but in the distance they would hear King Valador shouting orders to his men. The Guardians recovered quickly just as the second Dark Lord, Sorn, appeared. Unlike Gorgath, Sorn seemed to move through the battlefield like a shadow. He easily evaded blows and attacks from the Leonis and Veradin soldiers. Helgrims moved with terrible purpose beside him, blades slick with shadow. "Gorgath has fallen," Sorn said to himself. "He was always the weakest of us, relying too much on his brute strength and not his mind." Sorn's body was draped in black robes that seemed less like cloth and more like a living shadow. The edges of the robe blurred and dissolved into darkness, making it difficult to tell where the garment ended and the shadows began. He raised a gray hand and darkness began to engulf the battlefield around him. "He has turned the day to night," one of the Veradin soldiers yelled, terrified. "It is an illusion," King Valador responded. "Hold the line." When Sorn slashed the weapon outward, the darkness did not stop at the reach of his arm. The shadows leapt from the blade. A crescent of dark energy tore across the battlefield. Veradin soldiers in its path had only a heartbeat to turn before the darkness passed through them. Where it touched, Black veins of shadow spread across consuming metal and flesh. Men staggered, their breath stolen away as though the life had been ripped from their chests. "I am sick of these shadows," Wolfrid yelled. "Let's make quick work of him." The Guardians broke into a sprint. Wolfrid charged straight ahead like a sun amidst the darkness. Elias ran beside him, spear crackling with gathering lightning, each step sending sparks snapping across the sand. Alba darted ahead of them with fierce speed, her white hair whipping in the sea wind as frost formed along the length of her quarterstaff. Sorn turned slowly to face them, his pale, cruel face contorted into a malicious smile. "Trying to destroy me would be like trying to destroy the night itself. Strike the shadows if you wish. They will always return." And then he was gone. "Where is he?" Alba asked, spinning around. Her eyes searched the carnage of the battle. "You cannot hide from us," Wolfrid said as he raised the sword of sacred flame. The blade flared bright above him, dispelling the shadows. Its golden fire pushed back the gloom, revealing Sorn at the center of the battle. Alba slammed her staff into the ground. Frost exploded outward across the battlefield, spreading over the sand and ensnaring Sorn's legs. The frost raced up Sorn's leg, up his torso and straight to his head. He growled as the ice threatened to encapsulate him, but then he waved a shadowed hand. He melted down her ice, and then launched a shadow wave toward her from his dagger. Alba jumped out of the way moments before she was cleaved in two. "Not today." Elias yelled and ran forward, stabbing the enemy with his black spear. Bolts of electricity coursed through Sorn's body. Alba then jumped forward, releasing a storm of frost bolts at Sorn's head. After their attacks were done, Sorn laughed and unleashed a blast of shadow. "Your little attacks won't do anything to me. Every time you come at me, I'll just regenerate and come for you again. Why do you even bother? You can't hurt a shadow." With a flick of his wrist, Sorn pushed his shadows outward. Darkness spilled across the battlefield once more, twisting into jagged tendrils. Wolfrid blocked the attack with his blade, but it pushed him with such force that he fell back. One spear of shadow shot forward faster than the rest. The black strike tore straight into Elias' shoulder, ripping through mail and flesh alike. The impact hurled him backward across the battlefield. His spear clattered from his grip as he crashed to the ground, blood pouring from the deep wound. The shadow tendril tried to coil around him again, tightening like a black serpent ready to crush the life from his body. Then, a shield slammed in front of him against the darkness. Tamitha burst into the fight like a storm, as she drove forward with a cry of fury. Behind her came the shield maidens of Leonis, their shields locking together as they forced the darkness back. She dropped to Elias' side, one hand pressed hard against his wounded shoulder to stop the bleeding. Blood soaked through her fingers almost instantly. "Why is it that I always have to come save you?" Elias gave her a weak smile. "It's just a scratch. This is nothing." Wolfrid came up behind them. "Tamitha, cover us from enemy attacks so I can heal him." She rose again, her hands slick with Elias' blood as she lifted her shield toward Sorn. He was laughing maniacally as he launched shadow attacks into the battle. Soldiers of Veradin and Leonis collapsed in heaps of blood and shadows all around him. "Shields ready. Protect the Guardians." The shield maidens tightened their line around Elias, forming a wall of steel between Elias and Sorn. Wolfrid pressed his hand onto Elias' shoulder and began to pray. Golden light poured out from his hand, mending ligaments, muscle, and skin. The wound closed. "Now stop lounging around. We have work to do," Wolfrid said as he took up his blade once more. Ahead of them, Alba unleashed storm of frost and snow. Temporarily blinded by the snow, Sorn didn't see Wolfrid's approach. Now Wolfrid. She had given him just a moment, but it was enough. Behind her, Wolfrid sprang forward with the sword of sacred flame. Light poured from the blade as though the sun itself had been drawn down into its steel. Shadows recoiled from its radiance. In one unbroken motion, the radiant blade drove through Sorn's stomach. Sorn growled, fighting against the radiance burning away his body. Sorn took one hand and began to pull the blade out of his torso. Wolfrid used all his strength to push the blade in, but Sorn was stronger than he anticipated. Wolfrid let out a battle cry, and with one final push, the sword of sacred flame burned bright in Wolfrid's grasp, consuming the Dark Lord in righteous flames. Sorn fell. For a single suspended heartbeat, silence spread across the battlefield. Then the enemy line wavered. Without the Dark Lords, the coordinated assault fractured. Goblins and orcs broke ranks first and started attacking Leonis soldiers in a confused mass. The Helgrims dissipated into shadow. The trolls and giants still fought, stomping the human soldiers as though their masters still pushed them forward. Leona's soldiers surged forward with renewed strength as they saw the Dark Lords had been slain. Finally, the tide had turned. Above them, through smoke and ash, sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling golden light across the battlefield. In its glow, the sword of sacred flame burned brightly in Wolfrid's hand, its radiance like a beacon calling the defenders onward. Then a horn sounded. Through the thinning smoke rode King Leongarde of Leonis, mounted on a great warhorse the color of storm clouds. His golden armor was battered from battle, streaked with blood and soot, yet he sat tall in the saddle, sword raised high as he galloped into the fray. At his side rode his daughter, the Princess of Leonis, Leah, her blonde hair streaming behind her as her horse thundered across the broken field. She wore light armor beneath a crimson cloak, a bow drawn in her hands. "Forward!" King Leongarde roared, his voice cutting through the clash of battle. "The Dark Lords are fallen. Drive their minions from our land." The Leonis army answered with a thunderous shout and surged after him. The princess rose slightly in her saddle, drawing and releasing arrow after arrow with astonishing speed. Each shaft flew true. A goblin fell, then another. A fleeing orc stumbled as an arrow buried itself in the back of its skull. She loosed again, calm and deadly, clearing a path as the cavalry smashed into the scattered remnants of the Dark Lord's forces. Trolls stumbled under the charge of Leonis riders. Goblins fled in panic. What remained of the enemy army broke beneath the renewed assault. Wolfrid stood amid the wreckage of battle, the sword of sacred flame still blazing in his grasp as the king and princess rode past him. He watched the princess loose another arrow that dropped an orc mid-stride. "What a woman!" Wolfrid murmured to himself, awestruck. Alba smacked him sharply on the shoulder. "Close your mouth," she said dryly. "It's hanging wide open. You look ridiculous." She smirked as she watched him, his eyes never leaving the princess. With the death of the Dark Lords, the invading armies lost their will to fight. The dark forces dispersed, and so it was that the kingdom of Leonis had been successfully defended. A week later, Leongarde stood unbroken. The smoke had thinned. The breached walls were already under repair, scaffolding rising where siege towers had once loomed. The fields beyond the city were being cleared of wreckage and ruin. Ravens had given way to banners. The people of Leonis walked their streets again without flinching at every distant sound. The Dark Lords were annihilated, and so the king commanded a feast. The great hall of Leongarde blazed with torchlight and polished gold. Long tables stretched from one end of the chamber to the other, laden with roasted meats, steaming bread, sugared fruits, and silver pitchers of dark wine. Laughter grew steadier as cups were lifted and soldiers clasped forearms across the tables. Victory had come at a price, but it had come. Tamitha sat beside Elias, her shield resting against the bench behind her. Her armor had been polished, though faint scratches remained, honest reminders of battle. Elias leaned toward her as they spoke quietly, his posture relaxed in a way it had not been in weeks. Stormlight had left his eyes, warmth had returned. At the high table near the dais, Wolfrid stood beside the princess of Leongarde. She spoke to him with gratitude shining in her gaze, though he seemed almost uncomfortable beneath the praise. The sacred flame rested sheathed at his side, yet even in its scabbard it seemed to hum faintly, as though aware that it had changed the course of a kingdom. Alba sat farther down the table, alone but unbothered. Her white hair caught the firelight like winter under sunrise. A well-dressed man, and clearly emboldened by wine, approached her with what he must have believed was charm. She gave him one measured look, rolled her eyes, and then ignored him entirely. Turning to a passing server, she lifted her cup slightly. "Bring me more meat." The server hurried away without question. The hall roared with another wave of cheers as musicians struck up a livelier tune. For a few precious hours, people smiled as though there hadn't been a war at all. But shadows do not vanish. They retreat. When the feast ended and the final goblets were emptied, a royal attendant approached the guardians with a quiet bow. King Leongarde summoned them. The throne room felt different from the banquet hall. It was cooler, quieter, and heavy with authority. The great banners of Leonis hung restored above polished stone. King Leongarde stood before his throne, armor exchanged for royal vestments, though the weight of command had not lessened. King Valador stood at his right, silver circlet gleaming beneath torchlight. The princess stood at his left, her composure regal, her eyes watchful. The guardians approached and knelt. King Leongarde's voice carried with solemn gratitude. He thanked them for their mission, for their service. for the blood they had shed in defense of crown and kingdom. The king paused for a moment. We are fortunate the Sorn and Gorgath had only recently been summoned. Had they been at full power, I fear the result of this war may have been much different. The princess squeezed her father's shoulder and then smiled, a small act of encouragement. Then his tone shifted. It would seem the necromancer has escaped. King Valador has intel that he may be holed up in his ice fortress in the Frostlands. It once belonged to the tribes of the north, but he has received word from travelers that there is a darkness there that poisons the people. Will you go there and eliminate this enemy? The question did not linger long in the air. The guardians agreed. There was no hesitation in Wolfrid's steady nod. No doubt in Alba's clear gaze. Before they could answer, Elias stepped forward slightly, courage rising not from battle this time, but from something more personal. He asked boldly about Tamitha joining them. The king regarded him with a knowing glint in his eye before answering. Tamitha is a shield maiden of Leonis. Not only that, she is their captain. Her place is with them. I have a different mission for her. Perhaps, if God wills it, your paths will cross again. The words were firm, yet not unkind. Elias bowed, though disappointment flickered briefly across his expression before discipline restored his composure. The guardians bowed together before both kings. We will complete this mission, Wolfrid said. Outside the palace, night settled over Leongarde. But far beyond its walls, beyond the recovering plains and the quiet sea lanes, the northern horizon was already darkening. Snow clouds gathered over distant peaks. The war may be won, but the necromancer awaits. Thank you for watching our video. Making a video like this takes a lot of time and effort, so we'd appreciate it if you like and subscribe. Your support really helps the channel grow. Share the video with others and comment what your favorite part of the story is below. We'll see you next time.